I was sitting in my beat-up Honda Civic last Tuesday, engine sputtering like it was on its last breath, and I couldn't help but think about where I was 5 years ago. Same car, different parking lot. Back then, I was parked outside a warehouse in Detroit, staring at a rejection letter that might as well have been written in neon lights. We regret to inform you that your application has been unsuccessful. That warehouse job was supposed to be my stepping stone. Nothing fancy, just honest work to pay the bills while I figured out my next move. But even that simple warehouse job, they didn't want me. I remember crumpling up that letter and throwing it on the passenger seat, right next to the stack of other rejection letters that had been piling up for months. I was 28 years old, living in my sister's basement, and I felt like the world's biggest failure. You ever have one of those moments where you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person staring back at you? That was me every single morning. I'd brush my teeth and think, how did I get here? How did someone who used to have dreams end up feeling so ordinary? See, growing up, I had this vision of myself. I was going to be somebody, I was going to make my mark on the world. But somewhere between high school graduation and real life, that vision got fuzzy. College didn't work out the way I planned. The job market crashed right when I graduated. My parents kept asking when I was gonna get my act together. And honestly, I was asking myself the same question. But here's the thing about rock bottom, and I mean real rock bottom. Not the kind you see in movies where the hero has this dramatic moment, and suddenly everything clicks. Real rock bottom is mundane. It's eating ramen noodles for the 4th night in a row because that's all you can afford. It's avoiding phone calls from friends because you don't want to explain why you're still unemployed. It's that quiet desperation that sits in your chest like a weight you can't shake off. That night, after getting rejected from the warehouse, I drove around Detroit for hours. Just drove. I ended up at this 24-hour diner called Mel's, you know the type. Checkered floors, coffee that tastes like it's been sitting since the Clinton administration, and waitresses who've seen it all. I ordered a cup of coffee and sat in this corner booth, watching the night shift workers come and go. There was this guy, maybe in his 50s, wearing coveralls with Tony embroidered on the pocket. He came in around 2 a.m., ordered pie and coffee, and just sat there reading a paperback novel. Something about him caught my attention. Maybe it was the way he seemed completely content, like he had nowhere else he'd rather be. I don't know what came over me, but I walked over to his table. "Mind if I ask what you're reading?" I said, trying to sound casual. He looked up, smiled, and showed me the cover. "It's about this guy who builds boats," he said. "Never built a boat in my life, but I like reading about people who make things with their hands." We started talking, and Tony told me he worked the night shift at a factory that made car parts. Been there 23 years. I expected him to complain about it, but instead, he talked about it like it was the most important job in the world. "You know what I realized?" he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Every single part we make ends up in someone's car. Someone's driving their kid to school with a part I made. Someone's rushing to the hospital with a part I made. I'm not just making car parts, I'm making sure people get where they need to go safely." I sat there thinking, this guy's working a factory job, and he's talking like he's changing the world. And then it hit me, he wasn't delusional. He was onto something I'd been missing completely. I'd been so focused on finding the right job, the impressive job, the job that would make my parents proud and my friends jealous, that I'd forgotten about the most basic thing, showing up and doing good work, whatever that work might be. Tony and I talked until the sun came up. He told me about his daughter who was in college, how proud he was that his factory job was paying for her education. He told me about the garden he was building in his backyard, how he'd been working on it for 3 years, and it was finally starting to look like something. He told me about the book he was writing, yes, writing about his experiences working in the factory. "I used to think I was stuck," he said as we got ready to leave. "But then I realized I wasn't stuck, I was planted." Big difference. That phrase hit me like a lightning bolt. I wasn't stuck. I was planted. I drove home that morning with a completely different perspective. Instead of seeing rejection letters as proof of my inadequacy, I started seeing them as redirections. Instead of viewing my circumstances as permanent, I started viewing them as preparation. The next Monday, I showed up at that same warehouse. Not to reapply to ask if they needed any help with anything. Turns out they were swamped with inventory and could use someone to help organize their storage system. It wasn't a job exactly, but it was something. And sometimes, something is all you need to get started. I worked there for free for 2 weeks, showing up every day at 6 a.m., organizing boxes, cleaning equipment, doing whatever needed to be done. I didn't do it because I thought it would automatically lead to a job. I did it because Tony had shown me something important. The value of work isn't determined by the title or the paycheck. It's determined by the intention and effort you bring to it. On my 10th day there, the supervisor, Maria, pulled me aside. "You know we can't keep letting you work for free, right?" she said. "HR is having a fit." I thought I was about to get kicked out, but instead, she offered me a position. Not the one I'd originally applied for, something better. They'd noticed my organizational skills and wanted me to help redesign their entire inventory system. That warehouse job taught me more about life than any college course ever did. I learned that consistency beats intensity every single time. I learned that small actions repeated daily create massive results over time. I learned that your attitude toward your current situation determines your trajectory toward your future situation. But most importantly, I learned that there's no such thing as just a job. Every job is an opportunity to practice excellence, to serve others, to learn something new about yourself and the world around you. Maria became more than just a supervisor, she became a mentor. She taught me about supply chain management, inventory optimization, and business operations. But more than that, she taught me about leadership. She showed me how to see potential in people, how to give someone a chance when everyone else writes them off. After 2 years at the warehouse, I had saved enough money to go back to school part-time. I studied business administration with a focus on operations management. But I kept working at the warehouse because I loved it. I loved the people. I loved the problem solving. I loved feeling like I was part of something bigger than myself. By year 3, I was managing the entire logistics operation. By year 4, I was training new hires and developing systems that other warehouses in the company started adopting. By year 5, I was offered a position at the corporate headquarters. But here's the plot twist: I turned it down. I turned it down because I realized something profound. Success isn't about climbing the corporate ladder. Success is about becoming the kind of person who adds value wherever they are, whatever they're doing. Instead of taking the corporate job, I started my own consulting company, helping small businesses optimize their operations. I used everything I'd learned at the warehouse, combined with my business education, to help other companies become more efficient and profitable. Today, 5 years after that rejection letter, I employ 12 people. We work with over 50 small businesses across the Midwest. We've helped create jobs, improve efficiency, and increase profits for dozens of companies. But you know what I'm most proud of? Last year, we hired 3 people who were in situations similar to where I was 5 years ago. People who had been rejected everywhere else, people who felt like failures, people who just needed someone to give them a chance. One of them, Jessica, had been unemployed for 8 months. She'd been rejected from over 100 jobs. She was living with her parents, feeling like she was never going to get back on her feet. Today, she's our lead operations specialist, and she's saved our clients over $2 million in operational costs. Another one, Marcus, had been working dead-end retail jobs for years, feeling stuck and undervalued. He's now our client relations manager, and he's so good at what he does that companies specifically request to work with him. And Sarah was a single mom who had been out of the workforce for 5 years, taking care of her disabled son. Everyone told her she was unemployable because of the gap in her resume. She's now our project manager, and she's the most organized, efficient, and caring person I've ever worked with. These aren't just employees to me. They're proof that everyone has potential, everyone has value, everyone deserves a chance. They're proof that the system doesn't have to define you, you can define yourself. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't a story about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. This isn't about individual grit conquering all obstacles. This is about community, about people helping people, about recognizing that we all need each other. Tony at the diner didn't have to talk to me that night. Maria didn't have to give me a chance at the warehouse. My sister didn't have to let me live in her basement. My friends didn't have to stick with me through the rough times. Success isn't a solo journey, it's a team effort. And if you're listening to this right now, feeling stuck, feeling rejected, feeling like you're not good enough or you're behind in life, I want you to know something: you're not broken. You're not a failure. You're not worthless. You're planted. You're in a season of growth that doesn't look like growth. You're developing roots that will support the tree you're becoming. You're learning lessons that will serve you for the rest of your life. That rejection letter that felt like the end of the world, it was actually the beginning of everything. That job you think is beneath you, it might be exactly where you need to be to become who you're meant to be. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it doesn't hurt. I'm not saying you should be grateful for struggles or pretend that systemic problems don't exist. What I'm saying is that your current situation doesn't determine your future destination. What determines your future destination is what you do with your current situation. It's whether you show up with intention or with resentment. It's whether you look for ways to add value or ways to avoid responsibility. It's whether you see obstacles as roadblocks or as training equipment. Every morning, I still drive past that warehouse. Sometimes I stop and walk through the facility, just to remind myself where I came from. Maria still works there, still training new hires, still seeing potential in people that others overlook. And Tony finished his book. It's called Midnight Shift Wisdom, and it's about the life lessons he learned working in a factory for over 20 years. He self-published it, and it's become something of a cult classic among working class readers. He sends me a copy every year on the anniversary of the night we met at Mel's Diner. The inscription always says the same thing. Remember, you're not stuck, you're planted. Keep growing. So here I am, in my same beat-up Honda Civic. I kept it on purpose, as a reminder, but now I'm parked outside a different building. It's our new office space, twice as big as our old one, because we're growing faster than I ever imagined possible. But more than the business success, more than the financial security, what I'm grateful for is the clarity. I know now that there's no such thing as a dead-end job, only dead-end thinking. There's no such thing as being behind in life, only being on a different timeline than you expected. Your breakthrough might be disguised as a breakdown. Your greatest opportunity might look like your biggest disappointment. Your next chapter might begin with what feels like an ending. The warehouse that I thought was my failure became my foundation. The rejection that I thought was a judgment became a redirection. The rock bottom that I thought was my destination became my launching pad. And if you're at your warehouse moment right now, if you're holding your own rejection letter, if you're eating your own ramen noodles, if you're avoiding your own phone calls, I want you to know that this isn't where your story ends. This is where it begins. You're not stuck, you're planted. And everything you need to grow into who you're meant to be is already inside you, waiting for the right season to bloom. The world needs what you have to offer. We're all just waiting for you to realize it too. Keep showing up, keep growing. Your warehouse is waiting.